dan saya akan memandu jalannya acara webinar hari ini. Jadi, sebelum kita mulai, ada beberapa hal yang ingin saya sampaikan terkait pelaksanaan webinar ini. Jadi yang pertama adalah nanti akan ada sesi tanya-jawab di akhir webinar. Jadi bagi para peserta yang memiliki pertanyaan, silahkan tulis pertanyaan Anda melalui fitur Q&A selama webinar berlangsung. Pertanyaan Anda nanti akan dijawab oleh pemateri, baik secara tertulis melalui Q&A box maupun nanti akan dijawab secara langsung ketika Q&A session. Yang kedua adalah webinar ini akan direkam. Rekaman webinar ini akan dibagikan kepada peserta yang sudah mendaftar, dan rekaman akan tersedia dalam 2 bahasa, yakni bahasa Indonesia maupun bahasa Inggris. Yang ketiga adalah beberapa materi webinar nanti akan dibawakan dalam bahasa Inggris. Oleh sebab itu, kami menyediakan interpretasi langsung dalam bahasa Indonesia yang tersedia bagi peserta yang ingin mendengarkan materinya dalam bahasa Indonesia. Bagi Anda yang ingin mengakses fitur penerjemahan secara langsung, Anda dapat mengklik icon interpretation yang berada di bawah panel layar Anda dan memilih icon bahasa Indonesia. Silahkan ikuti langkah berikut untuk mengakses fitur interpretasi. Jika Anda tidak ingin mendengarkan suara dari pemateri, Anda dapat mengklik tombol mute original audio yang Anda dapat lihat di layar Anda. Bagi Anda yang menggunakan handphone, Anda juga tetap dapat menggunakan fitur interpretasi yang terdapat pada Zoom di handphone. Langkah untuk menggunakan fitur interpretasi ini dapat Anda lihat di layar dengan menekan tombol More, kemudian pilih Language Interpretation, kemudian pilih Indonesian. Sebelum kita masuk ke bahasan utama, saya ingin memberikan sedikit latar belakang diadakannya webinar hari ini. Proyek pengembangan kapasitas ini dapat terlaksana melalui pendanaan dari Department for Business, Energy, and Industrial Strategy Kerajaan Inggris, dan programnya sendiri bernama UKPAC, yang merupakan singkatan dari Partnering for Accelerated Climate Transitions. Program ini merupakan bagian dari komitmen Inggris dalam mengatasi isu perubahan iklim dengan bekerja dengan negara-negara mitra dan juga organisasi dalam mendukung percepatan transisi ke pertumbuhan yang rendah karbon. Bersama dengan mitra kami, GRI, kami menjalankan program peningkatan kapasitas bagi perusahaan tercatat di Indonesia terkait dengan isu-isu lingkungan, sosial, dan tata kelola atau yang kita kenal sebagai ESG di sepanjang tahun 2021. Dari sisi CDP, kami fokus untuk memberikan informasi mengenai praktik terbaik global untuk aksi dan pelaporan lingkungan perusahaan dalam konteks Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure atau yang kita pernah dengar dengan Tcfd, dan mitra kami, GRI, fokus pada bagaimana perusahaan dapat menyelaraskan tujuan dan indikator kinerja bisnisnya dengan tujuan pembangunan berkelanjutan atau SDG. Kami membagi webinar ini menjadi beberapa bagian, yakni webinar pemula, webinar mahir, dan juga saat ini adalah webinar untuk pasar modal. Webinar pemula telah diadakan di bulan Mei, dan webinar untuk tingkatan mahir atau advance itu sudah pernah diadakan di bulan Juni dan juga September. Anda nanti dapat mengakses rekaman-rekaman webinar sebelumnya dari laman YouTube-nya IDX dengan menggunakan tautan yang nanti akan ada di layar. Selain itu, kami juga memiliki beberapa bahan mengenai Tcfd yang telah diterjemahkan ke dalam bahasa Indonesia. Nanti bahan serta presentasi ini akan kami bagikan kepada peserta melalui email setelah kegiatan ini berlangsung. Baik, jadi tibalah kita di acara webinar hari ini yang merupakan rangkaian webinar terakhir yang akan kami adakan di Indonesia sebagai bagian dari proyek ini. Pada webinar-webinar sebelumnya, kami telah banyak fokus pada aksi dan inisiatif lingkungan yang perusahaan dapat lakukan untuk meningkatkan performa lingkungan mereka. Namun di webinar hari ini akan sedikit berbeda, karena kami akan fokus terhadap peran yang dimiliki oleh Tcfd dalam keuangan berkelanjutan. Dan sebelum saya masuk ke dalam agenda hari ini, sekali lagi saya ingin mengucapkan terima kasih sebesar-besarnya bagi para peserta dan juga pembicara yang telah bergabung dalam webinar hari ini. Terima kasih sebesar-besarnya kepada UKPAC Green Recovery Fund, PT Bursa Efek Indonesia dan Global Reporting Initiative, serta Kementerian Perencanaan Pembangunan Nasional atau Bappenas, Kedutaan Besar Inggris di Jakarta, dan juga Indonesia Corporate Secretary Association yang telah memberikan dukungan dalam pengembangan dan pelaksanaan proyek ini. Jadi berikut merupakan agenda hari ini, dapat kita lihat cukup padat. Sesi webinar hari ini berdurasi sekitar 2,5 jam, dan kita juga akan memiliki jeda untuk coffee break di antara agenda tersebut. Pertama, webinar hari ini akan dibuka dengan kata sambutan dari Bapak I. Gede Nyoman Yatna, yang kemudian akan dilanjutkan dengan pengenalan singkat mengenai CDP. Setelah itu, kita akan masuk ke sesi pertama, di mana pembicara akan memaparkan tentang kerangka ESG internasional dan juga mengenai keuangan berkelanjutan. Di sesi pertama ini, kami akan memiliki pembicara ahli dari Bappenas, GRI, dan Pcaf, dan setelah itu akan diisi dengan sesi tanya-jawab dan juga coffee break. Setelah itu kita akan masuk ke sesi kedua, di mana CDP akan memaparkan tentang risiko dan peluang serta peran dari keuangan berkelanjutan dalam dekarbonisasi, yang setelah itu akan dilanjutkan dengan sesi diskusi panel, di mana para panelis yang berasal dari Siam Commercial Bank, KB Financial Group, dan PT Barito Pacific akan menceritakan dan berdiskusi mengenai kegiatan mereka yang terkait dengan keuangan berkelanjutan. Kemudian di akhir, kegiatan ini akan ditutup dengan kata penutupan dari perwakilan Kedutaan Besar Inggris di Jakarta. Baik, mari kita masuk saja ke pembukaan acara yang akan dibuka oleh yang terhormat Bapak I. Gede Nyoman Yatna selaku Director of Listing dari Indonesia Stock Exchange yang akan memberikan kata sambutan. Baik, mari kita saksikan saja rekaman kata sambutan dari beliau.
Distinguished guest, Dr. Vivi Yulaswati, the Minister of National Development Planning for Social Affairs and Poverty Reduction, Bappenas, Mr. Ridwan Kurniawan, Program Manager, UK Partnering for Accelerated Climate Transition, Sustainable Development Team, British Embassy Jakarta, Ms. Tiang Kewei, Asia Pacific Lead Pcaf Secretariat and Consultant, Guidehouse, Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financial, Dr. Alinetsgo Adige, Head of Asian Regional Hub, GRI, Ms. Lani Haryanti, Regional Program Manager, ASEAN GRI, Ms. Pratima Dikvi, Regional Director, Carbon Disclosure Project, Hong Kong. To these panelists and all representatives from listed companies, exchange member, and all stakeholders in Indonesian capital market. A very good afternoon to all of you. I hope everyone is doing well and in good health. It is a great honor for Indonesian Stock Exchange to host this event together with Global Reporting Initiative and Carbon Disclosure Project with support of UK Partnering for Accelerated Climate Transition, Ministry of National Development Planning of the Republic of Indonesia, and Indonesia Corporate Secretary Association. Capital Market Webinar is a series of webinars that have been initiated since last June and have been held for 6 times from beginner to advanced workshop. This webinar focuses on providing the participant with in-depth knowledge on sustainable development goals and task force on climate-related financial disclosure, aligned reporting, and financing. It is also part of the global initiative to increase the quality of ESG reporting from business players that can affect the investment trend and decision from both local and global investors. All the topics presented in this webinar have been specifically designed to increase the understanding of SDGs and disclosure of climate-related financial risks, which aim to assist companies in reporting their sustainability report in accordance with OJK regulation. We believe that today's event will be fruitful for companies in Indonesia to calculate their business climate-related financial risks, manage their sustainable finance strategies, and consider options for funding and reporting. Next, please allow me to present my opening speech in bahasa. Ibu dan Bapak yang saya hormati, ADX berkomitmen mendukung penerapan ESG di pasar modal Indonesia. Selain memberikan awareness sustainability reporting secara berkesinambungan kepada para stakeholder, BI telah resmi bergabung sebagai member dari Sustainable Stock Exchange pada 18 April 2019. Pada Juni 2021, BI juga telah resmi menjadi supporter dari implementasi Tcfd. Kami juga mendukung stakeholder kami seperti perusahaan tercatat dan anggota bursa untuk lebih memperhatikan isu-isu ESG, menunjukkan komitmen untuk memajukan penerapan ESG dalam bisnis Bapak dan Ibu sekalian, dan melaporkan kegiatan ESG perusahaan dengan mengacu pada yang pertama, prinsip-prinsip dalam POJK, kedua, Sdgs, ketiga, standar pelaporan internasional seperti GRI dan Tcfd, agar informasi yang disampaikan oleh Bapak dan Ibu lebih komprehensif dan sesuai dengan international standard. Di Indonesia, Bapak dan Ibu sekalian, sudah terdapat POJK 51 tahun 2017 yang menjadi peraturan acuan bagi lembaga jasa keuangan, emiten, dan perusahaan publik untuk menerbitkan laporan berkelanjutan. Kewajiban penerbitan laporan berkelanjutan ini diterapkan secara bertahap, ada yang mulai dari pelaporan tahun 2019 sampai dengan tahun 2025. Untuk industri pasar modal, kategori perusahaan publik telah diwajibkan menerbitkan SR periode tahun 2020 dilaporkan pada tahun 2021. Namun, sesuai dengan surat keputusan OJK bulan November 2020, terdapat relaksasi atas kewajiban selama 1 tahun. Sehingga perusahaan publik diwajibkan menerbitkan SR untuk periode 2021 dilaporkan selamat-lamatnya April 2022. Sesuai POJK 51 2017, lembaga jasa keuangan, emiten, dan perusahaan terbuka wajib mempublikasikan laporan berkelanjutan melalui situs web perusahaan atau media cetak atau media pengumuman lain yang mudah dibaca oleh publik. Untuk membantu perusahaan tercatat mendisklose SR tersebut, BII telah menyediakan platform pelaporan secara elektronik yang kita sebut SPE IDXnet. Bapak dan Ibu sekalian, per 25 November 2021, terdapat 153 perusahaan tercatat yang menyampaikan SR tahun 2020 melalui platform tersebut. Jumlah tersebut meningkat dari tahun sebelumnya, di mana hanya terdapat 54 perusahaan tercatat yang menyampaikan laporan SR. Tentunya kami sangat mengharapkan kepada perusahaan tercatat dapat mengkapitalisasi platform SPE IDXnet untuk menginformasikan SR-nya sehingga memudahkan akses bagi investor terhadap laporan dimaksud untuk pengambilan keputusan investasi mereka. Ibu dan Bapak yang kami hormati, saat ini pelaporan berkelanjutan menjadi esensial dan menjadi concern bagi investor. BNP Paribas Asset Management dan Greenwich Associates menyampaikan hasil survei antara lain menyimpulkan bahwa sebanyak 81 investor institusi di Inggris dan negara Eropa telah menerapkan ketentuan ESG untuk portfolionya. Di Indonesia, hal ini dikonfirmasi juga dengan peningkatan AUM reksadana dan ETF berbasis indeks dengan tema ESG. pada Juni 2021 sudah terdapat 15 produk reksadana dengan total AUM sebesar 3,1 triliun. Sementara kalau kita bandingkan di tahun 2016, besarnya AUM hanya 42 miliar dari satu produk. Menanggapi kebutuhan ini tentunya Bursa Efek Indonesia juga adaptif dan meluncurkan indeks IDX ESG Leaders melengkapi indeks ESG yang sudah ada sebelumnya, yaitu Sri Kehati. Bapak dan Ibu yang saya hormati, kami berharap dengan adanya diskusi panel dari para expert, Bapak dan Ibu akan terinspirasi untuk kemudian dapat mendukung penerapan dan pelaporan aspek-aspek ESG ke depannya. Selamat mengikuti Capital Market Webinar pada hari ini. Semoga acara ini dapat bermanfaat bagi seluruh pihak yang hadir maupun bagi pertumbuhan perekonomian Indonesia. Salam sehat dan tetap semangat.
Baik, terima kasih banyak atas kata sambutannya. Sebelum masuk ke acara berikutnya, kami juga ingin sekali lagi mengucapkan terima kasih yang sebesar-besarnya kepada Bapak I. Gede Nyoman Yatna dan juga rekan-rekan dari Indonesia Stock Exchange yang telah menjadi mitra kerjasama dalam mensukseskan program pengembangan kapasitas ini. Baik, untuk memulai workshop hari ini, saya akan mengundang Miss Monica Bay yang memimpin tim CDP Capital Market di Asia Tenggara untuk memberikan pengenalan dan sedikit gambaran mengenai CDP. Monica, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Wisnu. And once again, thank you for joining our workshop today. I know many of you have participated in our previous workshops, but for those who are joining for the first time today, I would like to give a quick overview of TCFD and an introduction to CDP. So CDP is a global non-profit organization with 20 years of experience in developing and running the environmental disclosure platform. At the moment, we have the world's largest depository of environmental disclosure. And how CDP works is we have roughly over 600 financial institutions globally, and also over 200 multinational purchasing companies requesting information for companies to disclose to CDP. All of this is done through a set of standardized questionnaires on climate change, water security, and commodities related to deforestation, which are all aligned to TCFD, Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. So this comprehensive suite of environmental data that you see on the right-hand side, which is labeled as CDP data, is then provided back to the investors and multinational companies to be used as decision useful tool to engage with the broader economy to drive environmental action. Next page, please. So a quick overview of TCFD. As Wisnu has mentioned earlier, we did do an advanced workshop on Tcfd recommendations in June. So you can go back if you want to look into the details of it. But I just want to do an overcap of TCFD, which originates from the Paris Agreement of 2015. And this was really to limit global temperature rise to well below 2 degrees centigrade. So this, and another element I do want to stress in this workshop is that the TCFD, which is a forward-looking framework, was identified to be used by the capital markets participants such as investors, lenders, and insurance underwriters to really assess and price climate-related risk and the opportunities as well. So in 2017, TCFD issued a set of disclosure recommendations, and as you can see here, there are 4 pillars: governance, strategy, risk management, and matrix and targets. Next slide, please. So in terms of our CDP disclosure, we had the highest disclosure this year of over 13,000 companies disclosing to CDP. And we also have states, cities, and regions disclosing as well, which is over 1,000 worldwide. And this data really forms a fundamental platform to be used in supporting informed decisions, as well as an engagement tool with companies, and to assess and mitigate risk factors and identify opportunities in the future. Next slide, please. In terms of Apac region, out of the 13,000 companies that disclose, there were over 3,800 companies headquartered in this region, highest coming from China and Japan. For Indonesia, there was 74 Indonesian companies disclosing this year, which was over more than 100% increase from the previous year. And this trend really is from large purchasing organizations requesting information within their value chain, but also a real push for TCFD aligned disclosure, which is reflected in the numbers that we see here today. And I hope this workshop provides you with a good background of the recent developments and how climate-related risk has really, can be understood in the context of financing opportunities as well. Thank you, and back to you, Wisni.
Yeah, thank you so much, Monica, for providing the overview of the workshop today and a bit of refresher on TCFD. Baik, sekarang kita akan masuk saja ke sesi pertama dari workshop hari ini, di mana hari ini kita memiliki 3 narasumber yang akan memaparkan wawasan mereka tentang kerangka ESG dan juga keuangan berkelanjutan. Baik, mari kita undang pembicara pertama kita untuk sesi kali ini, yakni Ibu Dr. Vivi Yulaswati dari Bappenas yang akan memaparkan tentang SDG Financing Hub. Sebelum masuk ke sesi beliau, izinkan saya untuk membacakan profil mengenai Ibu Vivi. Jadi Ibu Vivi ini merupakan staf ahli Menteri Bappenas di bidang sosial dan juga penanggulangan kemiskinan. Tanggung jawab beliau adalah untuk melakukan analisa dan juga memberikan masukan mengenai kebijakan dan strategi dalam bidang pengembangan sosial dan juga percepatan penanggulangan kemiskinan. Selain itu, beliau juga mengkoordinasi pilar sosial dalam pencapaian SDG, serta bertanggung jawab untuk menciptakan lingkungan yang mendukung atau enabling environment untuk pembangunan yang inklusif. Ibu Vivi saat ini memiliki gelar PhD dalam bidang perencanaan dan pembangunan, serta master dalam bidang perencanaan wilayah dan kota. Baik, itu sedikit pengenalan mengenai Ibu Vivi. Sebelumnya saya juga untuk mengingatkan bahwa masing-masing waktu untuk masing-masing pembicara adalah sekitar 12 sampai 14 menit. Jadi nanti mohon izin untuk mengingatkan apabila waktunya sudah mendekati akhir. Baik, mari kita undang saja Ibu Vivi. Waktu dan tempat saya persilahkan.
Terima kasih Mas Wisnu, yang saya hormati Bapak dan Ibu narasumber, Bapak dan Ibu dari lembaga yang mendukung kegiatan ini. Tadi saya sempat ada Ibu Lani dari GRI, Bapak Ibu tentunya dari IDX dan lembaga lain, serta tentunya Bapak Ibu yang hadir pada siang hari ini. Selamat siang, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, salam sejahtera dan salam sehat untuk kita semua. Izinkan saya langsung share karena waktunya yang diberikan tidak terlalu banyak. Apakah sudah terlihat? Oke. Jadi kepada kami dimintakan topik mengenai financing, khususnya terkait untuk membantu percepatan pencapaian SDGs. Bapak dan Ibu sekalian, kita tahu semua bahwa dengan adanya pandemi saat ini banyak sekali upaya-upaya dilakukan untuk pemulihan dan sekaligus mentransformasi berbagai sistem yang ada termasuk ekonomi, di mana semuanya itu membutuhkan upaya yang lebih terorkestrasi. Karena kita saat ini sudah berada pada decade of action, tidak sampai 10 tahun, tepatnya 8 tahun lagi, berbagai komitmen global dalam hal ini terkait dengan SDGs cukup banyak, 17 goal, 16 target, 289 indikator perlu kita wujudkan. Melaksanakan SDGs juga sekaligus kita melaksanakan sebagian separuh jalan menuju komitmen global yang lain, yaitu Paris Declaration untuk net zero emission by 2050. Nah, ini hitung-hitungan antara 2050, 2060 ya, masih terus dilakukan. Sekali lagi, hal tersebut tentunya tergantung kepada kita semua, ya, upaya bagaimana mengorkestrasikan supaya dilakukan percepatan, terutama setelah adanya pandemi COVID yang banyak mendisrupsi target-target pencapaian SDGs, termasuk juga target-target terkait dengan lingkungan. Sebagaimana Bapak Ibu ketahui, data-data, kemudian juga informasi terkait lingkungan ya, misalnya untuk goal 12, 13, 14, 15 belum terbangun dengan baik atau tidak sebaik dengan pilar-pilar yang lain. Oleh sebab itu, dari sisi data dan informasi untuk lingkungan tadi sudah disampaikan juga Ibu Monica B menyebutkan itu sebagai salah satu entry point kita. Jadi dalam konteks transformasi ekonomi banyak sekali upaya-upaya yang perlu kita benahi dan tentunya perlu diakselerasi. Nah, oleh sebab itu berbagai cara, salah satunya kita melihat menghitung gap pembiayaan seberapa jauh kita dari pencapaian SDGs. Dari penghitungan kami ini di roadmap SDGs 2030, kita punya cukup besar kebutuhan untuk pembiayaan SDGs ya sampai 4,75 triliun USD, di mana gapnya itu mencapai 1 triliun USD. Pasca COVID secara global, kebutuhan untuk pembiayaan SDGs ini bertambah sekitar 70%. Nah, tentunya dari gap yang memang sudah besar sebelum COVID dan bertambah lagi dengan COVID, membutuhkan orkestrasi semua pihak. Tidak hanya dari sisi pemerintah, tidak cukup tentunya, namun juga dari berbagai non-state actor atau pihak non-pemerintah. Nah, Indonesia ternyata juga cukup banyak upaya-upaya yang dilakukan oleh non-state actor tersebut ya, baik itu dari kalangan bisnis, filantropi, atau bahkan dari unsur masyarakat. Kita sering mendengar misalnya dari sisi lembaga yang berbasis agama untuk penyelenggaraan zakat yang digunakan juga untuk banyak hal-hal terkait dengan pencapaian SDGs, misalnya dalam hal air bersih, kemudian juga pengurangan kemiskinan. Sama halnya dengan Bapak Ibu yang ada di swasta, tidak hanya melalui CSR, tetapi sudah mulai banyak sekarang misalnya menggantikan permesinan, kemudian juga menambah 2% keterlibatan penyandang disabilitas, atau juga memberikan perhatian yang lebih besar kepada pekerja perempuan, yang intinya sebetulnya cukup banyak pihak-pihak yang bergerak ke dalam atau menggunakan framework SDGs ya. Nah, oleh sebab itu dari sisi pendanaan kita sekarang mulai belajar memetakan berbagai upaya yang telah dilakukan. Jadi kalau dari sisi spektrumnya, Bapak dan Ibu bisa lihat di slide ini, sering disebut sebagai social investment, sebetulnya inline atau juga bagian dari yang sebagian Bapak dan Ibu banyak lakukan dalam konteks ESG, pembiayaan ESG ya. Bisa itu dalam konteks responsible investment, sustainable investment, atau impact investment ya. Nah, berbagai hal tersebut tentunya kalau kita bicara tentang canvassing ya, paling mudahnya melalui SDGs adalah kita mengacu kepada berbagai target dan indikator, di mana untuk Indonesia kita punya revisi edisi 2-nya, sehingga apapun yang Bapak Ibu lakukan atau biayai, kita bisa pantau dan kita bisa ukur dampaknya terhadap pencapaian SDGs. Jadi kita bisa sama-sama berkontribusi tidak hanya dari sisi traditional investment atau saya bisa bilang public investment, tetapi apa yang disebut sebagai social investment ini bisa kita hitung dan pada gilirannya kita bisa ukur bahwa itu punya kontribusi untuk pencapaian SDGs gitu. Nah, jadi dalam konteks pembiayaan sebetulnya apa yang sering kita sebut sebagai ESG dalam konteks financing kemudian juga SDGs sering digunakan interchangeably ya. Jadi berbagai instrumen lainnya misalnya untuk pengukuran kinerja misalnya lewat proper. Parameter yang dilakukan sekarang juga sudah menggunakan tidak hanya dari sisi lingkungan yang awalnya hanya untuk lingkungan, namun sekarang juga kepada parameter yang ke arah pilar-pilar lain dari SDGs gitu ya. Jadi kita bicara mau ESG atau SDGs is the same thing. At the end we are talking about bagaimana membalance aspek sosial, ekonomi, lingkungan, tentunya didukung dengan tata kelola yang baik. Dan pada gilirannya kita juga bicara mengenai impact. Sampai dengan 2030, kolaborasi diperlukan untuk akselerasi. Itu mungkin kata-kata kunci yang saya bisa ulang. Nah, Bapak dan Ibu, seperti tadi kami sampaikan, bahwa di Indonesia itu cukup banyak sekali upaya-upaya yang sudah dilakukan, baik itu dalam konteks pembiayaan social investment tadi, ataupun juga dalam konteks blended finance. Tapi blended finance yang kalau kita lihat sebelah kiri, itu kita masih sulit mengukurnya dan juga masih sulit mengakselerasinya kalau kita tidak concerted tadi. Ya, bagaimana combine sumber yang berbeda, baik itu dari public finance maupun juga yang dari private, itu bisa kemudian mengungkit, meleverage interest dari swasta lainnya. Bayangan kami adalah kalau sekarang Bapak dan Ibu melaporkan hanya core bisnisnya dalam sustainability report, kedepannya kami harapkan juga bisa juga melaporkan downstream ataupun juga UMKM yang terlibat pada value chain Bapak dan Ibu, ya. Nah, tentunya hal ini akan memberikan impact yang lebih besar tidak hanya kepada pengukuran pencapaian SDGs, tapi juga betul-betul dirasakan manfaatnya bagi masyarakat. Nah, tentunya dari sisi kebijakan, kemudian juga dari sisi evidence base tadi ya berdasarkan data, masih banyak hal-hal yang kita perlu bereskan, kita perlu orkestrasikan supaya kita bisa lakukan berbagai percepatan tadi. Nah, Bapak dan Ibu, ini kita bisa ada satu studi dari USAID yang mengupas sebetulnya permasalahan apa yang ada di Indonesia terkait dengan pembiayaan untuk blended finance. Ada dua tantangan atau dua masalah dalam hal ini. Yang pertama adalah ketiadaan proyek-proyek yang punya visibility untuk siap dibiayai. Jadi misalnya teman-teman dari CSO ataupun juga dari faith base gitu ya, karena orientasinya adalah bersifat karitatif ya, sehingga kesiapan suatu proyek untuk dibiayai oleh berbagai sumber lainnya di kita scale up itu yang tidak tersedia. Jadi itu masih banyak sekali ada, tetapi tadi tidak terorkestrasi dan tidak terstandardize, dan pada akhirnya kita sulit mengukur impact-nya. Hal yang kedua, permasalahan kedua adalah kurangnya fasilitas ataupun juga platform yang bisa mengcapture berbagai sumber pendanaan dari swasta tadi, gitu. Nah, dengan berbagai permasalahan tersebut, kita berpikir mengenai satu kajian satu lagi, INFF, Integrated National Financing Framework. Ini kita dibantu oleh UNDP dan juga OECD. Kita memetakan sebetulnya seberapa besar potensi kita bicara tentang potensi, dan kita bicara tentang mapping sumber-sumber pendanaan above the line dan juga below the line yang sekarang juga terus berkembang. Antara lain pemerintah 2 bulan yang lalu meluncurkan SDGs bond, masih tataran di global ya, namun sukses ya. Biasanya nanti akan diikuti lagi dengan penjualan untuk bond di dalam negeri. Nah, hal-hal seperti ini, kebaruan-kebaruan instrumen pembiayaan ini yang melalui INFF itu kita bisa petakan, kemudian kita strukturkan ya, dan kita matchingkan dengan berbagai platform partisipasi dari SDGs, baik itu dalam konteks sumber pembiayaan maupun juga dalam konteks penerima biayanya ya atau kebutuhannya. Jadi kami sudah menyelesaikan rencana aksi nasional 2021-2024 yang sebetulnya berupa living document, artinya bagi swasta yang belum sempat masuk kemarin ya pada saat kita berproses, tentunya ke depan kita sangat harapkan masuk. Tadi saya senang sekali nih Ibu Monica B menyebutkan semakin banyak dari sisi global perusahaan dan juga lembaga-lembaga lainnya yang mendisclosure untuk pelaporannya. Sebetulnya bukan masalah disclose atau close, tetapi it's about the responsibility kita yang saya pikir sangat layak untuk diketahui, dan pada gilirannya saya tadi dalam konteks rencana aksi kita bisa canvassing untuk memetakan gap dan tentunya kemudian mengkolaborasikan berbagai upaya kita. Bicara air bersih misalnya di suatu daerah, atau di suatu wilayah, suatu desa, kita bisa tahu siapa-siapa yang sudah berkontribusi. Kalau masih ada kekurangan, kita bisa mendorong pihak-pihak mana lagi yang bisa kita dorong ke arah sana. Karena biasanya sebarannya memang tidak merata. Sementara kebutuhannya pun juga tidak merata. Nah, melalui canvassing lewat rencana aksi nasional dan nantinya ditindaklanjuti dengan daerah. Kalau nasional biasanya lintas provinsi ya. Nah, yang untuk daerah ada rencana aksi daerah, sekarang ada 31 provinsi yang sudah punya rencana aksi daerah. Di situ kita bisa canvassing mengidentifikasi indikatif rencana dari berbagai pihak. Tidak hanya dari pemerintah tetapi juga non-state actor. Ada dari bisnis dan filantropi dan juga dari CSOs. Nah, Bapak dan Ibu, tentunya upaya ini sejalan dengan berbagai tren yang ada ya, di mana kapasitas pembiayaan kita pada saat ini masih bisa dibilang relatif sulit ya. Nah, tentunya mengorkestrasikan berbagai upaya lainnya tanpa harus ada new sources gitu ya, tapi kita bisa mencatatkan dengan lebih baik lagi. Tadi terkait dengan disclosure yang semakin besar dan juga tentunya dengan standardize yang lebih baik gitu. Nah, Bapak dan Ibu sekalian, ini ada beberapa data saja, saya tidak akan ke dalam, tetapi menunjukkan bahwa rasio pajak kita ya setelah beberapa waktu ini, tentunya setelah COVID, ke depan masih sulit untuk kita andalkan ya. Nah, jadi tentunya sumber-sumber pembiayaan lainnya ini yang kita coba dorong untuk lebih bagaimana kita bisa melihat gap dan juga concerted effort melalui kerja-kerja nyata yang sebetulnya juga sudah banyak dilakukan berbagai pihak, termasuk di sini adalah non-state actor itu. Nah, jadi Bapak dan Ibu, beberapa yang sudah dilakukan sebagai suatu instrumen, tadi sudah banyak disebutkan adanya sustainability report, sebentar lagi green taxonomy ya sudah hampir selesai. Kemudian juga instrumen-instrumen seperti SDGs bond, green suku, kita juga bicara tentang blue bond, ada lagi nanti dari sisi kelembagaannya juga banyak. Nah, seperti berbagai yang tadi saya sebutkan, inilah yang kita maksudkan sebagai perlu diorkestrasikan melalui apa yang disebut sebagai SDGs Financing Hub. Jadi ini sebetulnya adalah umbrella policy untuk mengorkestrasikan berbagai sumber pembiayaan inovatif, jadi yang non-konvensional, supaya kita bisa melakukan tidak hanya bekerja sama, tetapi bisa melakukan matchmaking untuk menghasilkan dampak terhadap pencapaian SDGs. Hal lain adalah kita membangun capacity building, tentunya kita tidak bicara hanya nasional, cukup banyak juga pemerintah daerah yang sebetulnya punya potensi dan juga kebutuhan yang kita bisa mapping. Berbagai data saat ini sedang berproses masuk ke dalam satu data Indonesia yang kebetulan dikoordinir juga oleh Bappenas ya. Nah, oleh sebab itu tadi kami mulai dari penyempurnaan data-data SDGs ya melalui perbaikan dashboard kita yang akan lebih iteratif, termasuk juga mengisi data-data seperti untuk goal 12 sampai dengan goal 15 yang terkait dengan lingkungan yang saat ini masih tersebar. Kemudian juga dari sisi data, kemudian juga mengukurnya. Nah, ini yang kita coba atur nanti melalui SDGs Financing Hub ini ya, dalam konteks pendanaan SDGs untuk sampai dengan 2030. Jadi kalau ada gap, perlu ada akselerasi, itu kita bisa lakukan. Nah, jadi peran-perannya mulai dari mengkoordinasikan pendanaan. Di hub ini juga akan fasilitasi pengelolaannya. Nah, kita juga berpikir ini kolaborasi dengan non pemerintah ya tentunya yang supaya memudahkan flow of informasi dan juga tata kelolanya. Kemudian melakukan matchmaking misalnya dari pihak-pihak non-state actor seperti CSO atau faith base ya, atau bisa juga bersifat iteratif supaya matchmaking mengenai lokasi, goal, target, dan juga indikator yang kita perlu kejar atau perlu akselerasi, itu kita bisa lakukan di sini ya. Nah, jadi
Ibu Vivi,
kurang lebih
mohon izin mau mengingatkan tinggal 1 menit lagi, Ibu.
baik. Oke, nah salah satu yang kita upayakan antara lain adalah kita membuat project digest untuk atau menyiapkan project digest untuk Dubai World Expo. Jadi ini kita coba tawarkan ke arah global. Jadi sana kita mencoba one-on-one meeting untuk matchmaking pembiayaan berbagai program atau proyek yang kita tawarkan. Ada yang dari Pertamina, ada juga yang dari impact social entrepreneur dan seterusnya. Nah, jadi pada intinya berbagai pendanaan berkelanjutan dan juga inovatif. Indonesia sudah banyak, sekarang tinggal kita orkestrasikan supaya kita bisa lakukan scale up dan tentunya mengakselerasi pencapaian SDGs supaya target-target SDGs untuk Indonesia bisa dicapai tepat waktu. Demikian yang bisa saya sampaikan, lebih dan kurangnya mohon maaf. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Baik, terima kasih banyak Ibu Vivi atas pemaparannya mengenai SDG Financing Hub, khususnya peran Bappenas tadi ya untuk mendukung pembiayaan SDG dan juga ESG secara umum. Selanjutnya, saya akan mengundang pembicara berikutnya, yakni Dr. Elin Edige, yang akan memaparkan mengenai standar GRI untuk pelaporan SDG dan juga keuangan berkelanjutan. Sedikit mengenai Dr. Elin, beliau merupakan Head of GRI Asian Hub dan bertanggung jawab untuk mempromosikan praktek sustainability reporting di kawasan ASEAN. Sebelum bergabung dengan GRI, beliau bekerja di bidang akademia dan juga di sektor publik maupun di sektor private. Beliau saat ini memiliki gelar PhD di bidang kebijakan publik dan juga 2 gelar master dalam bidang studi pembangunan dan juga administrasi publik. Baik, mari kita undang saja Dr. Elin Edige, and without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Dr. Elin.
Thank you very much, Vishnu. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for having me here. It's nice to be back in Indonesia, although virtually I used to go there several times a year to conduct workshops and training at the IDX office. So let me just share my screen first. Okay. I hope you can see it now. Okay, let me just move to the start.
Yep, it's not full screen yet. Now it's full screen. Great.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you. So today I am tasked to talk about GR standards for SDG and sustainable finance reporting. So I will not go into details on this. Vivi has done a fantastic job in laying out, the importance of financing the SDGs and even talked about what the status of financing for the SDGs in Indonesia. So I'll just skip this one. Going to the heart of the matter, what is the role of reporting in achieving the SDGs? So why does reporting matter? 2 things. One, because their tracking progress will be key to the success of the SDGs. In fact, the UNESCO reported in 2019 that Southeast Asia is lagging behind in achieving the SDGs, and they identified 2 reasons. One is that there is not enough financing going to the SDGs, and another reason is that there's just not available reliable data, which means probably companies are doing or organizations are doing something, but it's not being reported, so it's not being monitored and tracked. And the other is governments and other stakeholders are demanding more data from business. So those are the 2 reasons why it's important for business to shape and influence what will be tracked and reported, because what doesn't get reported doesn't get managed. I think that's how it goes. Okay. So for investors do have an interest in sustainability reporting. Sorry about that. Okay. Well, because for one, investors are universal owners. What do I mean by that? Institutional investors in particular, they have, a huge footprint, even though they're not running the business, but by investing, they do have an exposure on the social and environmental performance of the companies that they invest in. And for the most part, asset managers are managing assets or funds that are owned by someone else. So they have to act in the interest of the beneficiaries and not for their own interest. So it's important for them to make sure that what they're channeling the money into are sustainable. So as we know, business activities have real world impacts, and with sustainability reporting, stakeholders would have a way of monitoring and learning of what are the impacts of businesses to the external world, including environmental, social, and economic impacts. And the use of this SDG reports or the sustainability reports will be consumed by the investment community, which will allow them to make informed investment decisions, thereby channeling capital to responsible and sustainable businesses. And in that manner, both investors and the business community are contributing to sustainable development. So there's now increasing interest in sustainable development and investment. So I am sure a lot of you have heard about the Principles for Responsible Investment, which is the world's leading proponent for responsible investment. In fact, membership has grown to around 3,038 signatories coming from asset managers, asset owners from all over the world, amounting to around at least 3,000 as of March. And together, these signatories manage more than 100 trillion in assets, which is practically, majority of the asset under management globally. And all the signatories of the PRI commit to a number to the 6 principles for responsible investment when they are investing. So there are 6. I will not go through them one by one, but what is relevant to sustainability reporting? Principle 3. So principle 1, basically, excuse me. So investors commit to incorporating ESG issues into investment analysis and decision-making processes. And how do they do that? How would they know if the companies that they are investing in are practicing ESG? And that is where reporting comes in. So that's principle 3 in particular, where they committed to seek appropriate disclosure on ESG issues by entities in which we invest. So that's where sustainability reporting comes in. Okay. Another organization that's pushing for sustainable investment is the GISD. So the Global Investors for Sustainable Development Alliance. This is also part of the United Nations. And the group aims to leverage the insights of private sector leaders to remove impediments and implement solutions for mobilizing resources for sustainable development. So the member organizations of the GISD recommends a number of categories when it comes to SDG-related disclosure. So there are 4 areas. One is governance, meaning companies should disclose the company's governance around SDG-related risks and disclosure, risks and opportunities. So you can see on your screen what are the specific disclosures that they can provide. Another is in terms of their strategy, meaning how does the company embed sustainable development and the SDGs in its strategy and purpose. So you cannot just say, as a company, you cannot just say that, you're supporting the SDG. It has to be proven by your own strategy. And of course, for every every strategy that a company adopts, there would be possible risks. So the GISD also recommends to disclose how the company identifies, assesses, and manages sustainable development-related risks. So you can also see on your screen what are these recommended disclosures when it comes to risk management. And then the 4th a disclosure would be on metrics and targets that the company would use to assess the company's alignment with sustainable development. So there are three recommended disclosures looking at, sector agnostic related metrics. Of course, different industries would have different environmental, social, and economic impacts. And then they can also report on selected sector-specific metrics that provide info on the company's contribution on the SDG. And the last one is disclose measurable and time-bound targets. So they should be concrete, not motherhood statements. They should be able to be qualified and quantified. Okay. So how does these two organizations pushing for sustainable investing, supporting the SDG, relate to the GRI standards? So for those, I hope most, if not all of the participants are aware of the Global Reporting Initiative, the GRI standards. We are the pioneer in sustainability reporting, and majority of the world's largest companies are using GRI standards. So if you look at this, so going back to the PRI, right? So they recommend the investors to look at reports or disclosures. So that very much complements the GRI standards pushing for sustainability reporting. And when it comes to GISD, looking at these four categories that you see on your screen, these are also very much aligned with the GRI standards. For those who are aware, the universal standards lay down the specific metrics and disclosures that a company can report on when it comes to governance. And in terms of metrics and targets, depending on the material topic of the company, there are also different metrics that are specified there, whether it's economic, environmental, or social disclosures that companies can use to measure their sustainability impact. And of course, as I mentioned, no, I haven't mentioned, by doing sustainability reporting and keeping track of your sustainability impact, it also gives you a picture of what are the corresponding risks in managing these material topics. So sustainability reporting is not just, a reporting exercise that you do at the end of the year. It also helps you have a good idea of what are the risks, corresponding risks that confront the organization. And in that manner, having identified that, it will also give you a good idea on how to move forward and plan the appropriate strategy for the company. Okay, so for GRI, we have published a interconnected publication on promoting effective and principle-based reporting on the SDGs. So if you are moving towards reporting on the SDGs, then it very much complements also with the GRI standards. And in these three interconnected reports, if you want to prepare a report for the purpose of your investors, the third guide talks about addressing investor needs in business reporting in the SDGs. So this particular guidance, the third one, it provides guidance to better align corporate SDG-related disclosures with investors' information needs. It also includes reporting recommendations to stimulate more investment in business solutions to help advance the SDGs. So for this guide, we have developed this together with the principles of responsible investment and the UN Global Compact. So you are assured that if you're a part of PRI, GRI standards is very much aligned. So the publication has three parts. So one, it's established as the first part, talks about the importance for companies to provide relevant SDG data to investors, which I have touched also by talking about, PRI and GISD. And the second is what are the elements of investor relevant business reporting on the SDG? So again, as I mentioned, if you are preparing a report catered for the investors, what are these things that you should report on? And then the third is also knowing your target audience. So you have this talks about how to understand the SDG disclosure demands of investors. So what are the elements of reporting on the SDGs for the purpose of submitting it to the investors? So these are the key recommendations that the document provides to develop investor relevant reporting. So there are four areas that you can look into. One is the message and approach. So of course, your message has to be consistent and it has to be integrated across financial and SDG reporting. The next one is strategy and governance. If you recall the two earlier, going back to earlier slides, I talked about the GISD recommended disclosures, and they also talk about the importance of strategy. So for this part, the reporter should identify how SDG trends are linked to the key factors driving corporate strategy. So what does that mean? So for example, you are in the business of manufacturing beverage. So there is a particular SDG that talks about water, which is life underwater.
Dr. Ellen, excuse me, just a reminder, you had around 3 more minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I should be done by then. And then you also have to talk about how you manage your strategy, talking about your policies. And then, of course, you have to indicate SDG target-related performance and how you appraise and reward that. And then in terms of report content, you talk about risk and opportunities towards the SDG, again, consistent with the GIST. And of course, your report should be of quality and balance. So looking at both the positive and negative impact. And if you could also provide forecast by demonstrating the cause and effect relationship that exists between SDG contributions and business performance. And of course, you have to provide, concrete data to support all of this. Okay, and then how do you for this part, knowing both your audience. So there are two ways of doing that, by knowing reporting based on the company perspective and of course the investor perspective. And by doing that, you have to report on 4 areas again. So first, understand and prioritize the SDGs. And then, of course, basically, why are the SDGs relevant to you? And the investor perspective, you have to lay down the criteria for saying that this is the SDG that are relevant to you. And then you set your objectives and benchmarks. Meaning what a benchmark is with your peers, meaning companies that are operating in the same industry. And then in the report itself, you describe your management systems, meaning how do you manage these material topics, and you tie it to the real world impact of your business strategy. And for the investor part, it helps the investee management understand the fitness. And it also helps explore SDG related portfolios. And the last, of course, the important thing, we're talking about the SDG. The report is used to engage with investors on results, implement changes, and as an input for next reporting cycle. So with the requirement of the IDX, and I'll use this also as an opportunity to remind all of you, as you know, OJK, starting next year, will require listed companies to submit their sustainability report. So if you're reporting for the first time, this would be a good way to start by already tying it with the SDG. And I think that's it from me. If you have any questions, just type it on the Q&A box. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ellen, for your presentation on how GRI is addressing and promoting an effective reporting, especially on SDG that is very relevant for investors. So just let me share my screen for a while. Now we are going to have our next speaker, which is from Pcaf, which is Mrs. Tiange Wei. So, excuse me, I'm going to revert back to Bahasa. Untuk pembicara selanjutnya, kita ada Mrs. Tiange Wei dari Pcaf yang merupakan singkatan dari Partner for Carbon Accounting Financials yang akan memaparkan tentang standar greenhouse gas accounting untuk lembaga jasa keuangan. Beliau saat ini merupakan tim lead Asia Pasifik dari Sekretariat Pcaf yang bertanggung jawab untuk semua kegiatan regional Pcaf. Beliau juga merupakan konsultan di Guidehouse, di mana beliau membantu lembaga jasa keuangan dan juga perusahaan-perusahaan besar lainnya untuk memahami dampak, resiko, dan juga peluang yang terkait dengan perubahan iklim. Beliau memiliki keahlian dalam beberapa ilmu terkait keuangan berkelanjutan yang mencakup greenhouse gas accounting dan juga manajemen resiko terkait perubahan iklim. Baik, itu sekilas profil mengenai Mrs. Tiange Wei. Mari kita mulai saja sesinya. Thank you very much for joining us today, Tiange. I'll hand it over to you, and before that, I just would like to have a reminder that we have around 12 to 14 minutes for the presentation, and I'll remind you when we approaching that time. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the warm introduction, Wisnu, and thank you for inviting me along to talk. I'm very delighted to be here and present to you Pcaf, the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials. Please allow me to start sharing my screen. I hope that you can see my screen now.
Yep, it's on full screen right now.
Perfect. Thank you very much for confirming. So Pcaf, enabling financial institutions to assess and disclose financed emissions. So over the next 12 minutes, let's begin with an overview of Pcaf. Then I'll run you through the value of measuring finance emissions and introduce the overarching equation behind Pcaf's methodology and cover participation in Pcaf before we wrap up. So you may wonder, what is Pcaf? And Pcaf, we are a global partnership of financial institutions that work together to develop and implement a harmonized approach to assess and disclose the greenhouse gas emissions associated with loans and investment. So really, we are focusing on Scope 3, Category 15 investment for a financial institution. So Pcaf is an industry-led initiative and it's funded by philanthropies. And on this screen, you can see a summary of the history of Pcaf. So we started in the Netherlands in 2015 as a collaboration amongst banks, asset owners, asset managers, and insurance company. And in 2018, Pcaf expanded into North America, and a group of financial institutions decided to globalize this initiative in 2019. And in September 2019, the Pcaf Global Initiative was launched. So, so this initiative is governed by a global steering committee, and you can see these 8 financial institutions on the screen here. They are essentially responsible for leading the progress towards achieving the mission and objectives of Pcaf. And you can check the full list of Pcaf participants and download the standard using the links on the slide deck today. So the group of financial institutions amongst the Pcaf created the first global greenhouse gas accounting and reporting standard for the financial industry. So I will refer to it as the Pcaf's global standard in the presentation. This is built up on the Greenhouse Gas Protocol Scope 3 standard, which was released back in 2011. So over the years, Pcaf went through several phases of development, and we launched the first edition of the global greenhouse gas accounting standard for the financial industry in November 2020. The standard has been reviewed by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which means that it is in conformance with the requirements set forth in the corporate value chain. So that's the Scope 3 accounting and reporting standard for Category 15 investment activities. So currently where we are present in over 48 countries, and between them represent over 55 trillion of US dollars in total assets. So since we launched globally in 2019, we have come a long way in less than 2 years. Our network includes commercial banks, financial groups, as well as asset managers and insurance companies. So we boast diversity through the variety and the type of financial institutions that are part of Pcaf. And currently we are seeing great momentum, especially in the Asia Pacific region. And we would like to invite financial institutions to join and become part of the network in Indonesia. Let me move on to the next slide, which you can see there are 6 icons representing 6 different asset classes. So the first edition of the standard currently covers 6 asset classes. So you may wonder why these 6. So when the core team was developing the standard, they chose these 6 specifically because these asset classes were determined to be the most relevant for financial institutions globally. And they formed the largest share of financial institutions' portfolio. And the detailed methodology for the 6 asset classes can be found in the standard. And I will also go through the overarching equation in the later in my presentation. So the next slide, it shows the current core team member on the right-hand side. So we can see representatives from different geographies, and we really believe in the importance of diversity, creating a standard that's truly global and brings in insight from a range of regions. So the Pcaf core team, they are currently working on the 2nd edition of the standard, and we recently launched our public consultation on 3 new greenhouse gas accounting draft methods covering sovereign bonds, green bonds, and emission removals. They are now underway. So the Pcap, this public consultation is open until the 17th of December this year. So we want all stakeholders to participate and provide feedbacks and comments. I've introduced myself as a member from the Pcaf Secretariat. I've also mentioned about the steering committee and also the core team members who essentially formed working groups and took the lead in developing these draft methods. So Pcaf, this is overview of our organizational structure. We drive implementation through regional and national collaborations. The regional implementation team, they feed the development of the standards through local collaboration. So currently the standard, the Pcaf standard is being implemented in 5 different regions: Africa, Asia Pacific, Europe, Latin America, and North America. So each region has regional implementation teams with a clear governance structure, and Pcaf is entirely industry-led, meaning that it is driven by the financial institutions, and the formation of national chapters is part of that, and it's all driven by local demand. So in Asia Pacific, recently we established Pcaf Japan, which is a new addition to the national chapters. And we encourage all stakeholders, especially financial institutions, to contact us with suggestions on Pcaf, how Pcaf could grow in the region. So the next section really is to walk you over the value of measuring finance emissions. So let me proceed to the next slide. So accounting for greenhouse gas emissions can help financial institutions achieve multiple objectives. You can see the 4 business goals on the slide here. And these include creating transparency for stakeholders, managing financial risks associated with climate policies and regulations, as well as creating new financial products to further the transition to net zero and aligning the financial flows with the goals of Paris Agreement. So different initiative has responded to these business goals. And in the next slide, I will discuss a couple in more detail. So we've heard from CDP earlier, and Monica gave a brilliant introduction. So how Pcaf is aligned with CDP. The finance emissions, they are an important metric in creating transparency for stakeholders. So Pcaf supports CDP in creating transparency for stakeholders, and CDP asks financial institutions to disclose this Scope 3 Category 15 investment emissions along with the breakdown of emissions by asset class, sector, and geography for transparency. So the Pcaf standards, it directly supports the financial institutions to answer these questions by providing asset class specific methodologies that allows for disclosures on these levels. And Pcaf and CDP, we are working closely to provide transparent disclosure for stakeholders to help them better understand a financial institution's portfolio alignment to the global climate goals and also their exposure to carbon intensive industry. And in addition, finance emissions are a key metric to understand climate related transition risk as per the Tcfd. So one of the goals of the Tcid framework is to measure and disclose the risks posed to organizations by climate-related policies and regulations. So Pcaf, we support this objective by providing methodologies to measure finance emissions and also a total value for the absolute emissions associated with the loans and investment portfolios. And financial institutions can use findings from these assessments to identify the carbon-intensive hotspots and that could subject to higher transition risk. TCFD, they officially recommends the banks, asset owners and asset managers to measure and disclose finance emissions in line with the Pcaf standard. And greenhouse gas accounting is a necessary step for organizations to better manage their emissions and align with the Paris Agreement. So the global Pcaf standard, we aim to standardize the approach for accounting for finance emissions to ensure the use of robust, transparent and comparable methodology. And you can see on this slide we try to illustrate the path to net zero emissions by 2050. This is not a linear process. What Pcaf focuses on is the first orange pillar you can see on the slide, which is measure and disclose. So measurements and disclosure of finance emissions, it is an incredibly important step because it is required for the next stages, which include setting a target in line with the Paris Agreement, developing effective strategies to support the decarbonization, and taking necessary actions to reduce climate-related risk. So these stages, they form the part of the 5 steps of the Paris alignment value chain for financial institutions. I had the pleasure to co-author the paper you can see on this slide here, the strategic framework for Paris alignment. And if you're interested to learning more about a global landscape overview of the resources for financial institutions, from measuring finance emissions all the way to taking action, you can download by clicking on the link on this slide. So this figure here is a summary from the framework that I mentioned on the previous slide, and really is to illustrate, there are numerous number of climate initiatives, many methodologies and tools supporting financial institutions to align with the Paris Agreement. And Pcaf, where it sits in this ecosystem, is that Pcaf is the only initiative that has a focus on measurement of finance emissions for banks and investors. So this complements the work with other initiatives and offer the financial institutions to help them build synergies.
Yang, sorry, just a reminder, you have around 2 more minutes. Thank you.
Many thanks, Wisnu. I'll be done by then. So on the next slide, I'd like to give a very high overview on how Pcaf uses this robust and consistent approach to calculate finance greenhouse gas emissions. So the methodology in the standard apply the same general attribution principles across all asset classes. The attribution factor is calculated by determining the share of the outstanding amount of loans and investment of financial institutions over the total equity and debt of the company or project, etc., that the financial institution is invested in. So there's a common denominator including equity and debt, which is in line with leading practices in financial sector. And this methodology does not differentiate between equity and debt, as both contribute to total finance and the borrower or investees, and avoids double counting of emissions between equity and debt. I'd like to, in the view of time, I'd like to go through and move on to the next session really quickly, which is the participation in Pcaf. So there are numerous benefits of joining Pcaf, which includes the opportunity to expand your network, receive global leadership recognition, and also give you access to the Pcaf emission database, which contains over 3 million live emission factors to help you with your greenhouse gas accounting journey. And the Secretariat supports by your greenhouse gas accounting journey by offering workshops and trainings, and more are available on the website. So for Pcaf participants, what they do is they commit to assess and disclose the greenhouse gas emissions of its portfolio, and by signing a commitment letter. And the commitment, in short, is measure and disclose portfolio emissions within 3 years of signing the commitment letter, where the portfolio coverage is also up to the institution. We have come to the end of the section, so thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate by leaving them in the chat Q&A box, or reach out to the secretary by email. Thank you very much. I'll hand it back to you, Wisnu.
Yep. Just give me 1 second. Yep. Thank you so much, Tiangge, and also I'll revert back now to Bahasa. Jadi terima kasih banyak kepada pembicara kita di sesi ini, Ibu Vivi, Mrs. Ellen, dan juga Mrs. Tiangge, yang sudah berbagi ilmunya dengan peserta, khususnya mengenai ESG, framework, dan juga sustainable finance. Sekarang kita masuk ke sesi tanya-jawab sebelum kita coffee break untuk sejenak. Namun karena waktu kita cukup padat, saya hanya akan mengambil satu pertanyaan untuk sesi ini, dan nanti pertanyaan yang belum dijawab akan di-follow up oleh pembicara setelah kegiatan berlangsung. Jadi di sini saya sudah melihat barusan ada satu pembicara, satu pertanyaan yang mungkin bisa masuk ke semua pembicara ya. So there's one question here that I think could be addressed to all of the speakers. So the question is, please explain some of examples of ESG risk and how to measure them and disclose them on the reports. I think in this question we could address it to all of our panelists. Maybe we could start first with Dr. Ellen from the GRI perspective.
Thank you very much, Vishnu. So for this question, again, it would be useful if you're reporting using the GRI standards, because as I mentioned earlier, while the GRI standards allows you to keep track of your sustainability performance in the area of environment, economic, and society, those impacts would also give you an idea in which areas you would have risks as well. So how do you determine that? So for GRI standards, you have to follow the principle of materiality. And when we talk about the principle of materiality, these are the material topics in which you as an organization have an impact on. So this is inward looking outward. So in every activity that you do as an organization, how does it impact people, including human rights, to the environment or to the economy? And in that way, it will allow you to also identify the corresponding risks, not just the risk, but also the corresponding opportunities. So if you want to learn more about how to use the GRI standards, you can go to our website, you can download the standards, and you can also avail the trainings from our different certified training partners located in Indonesia. Okay. I hope I managed to answer your question, Andoko.
No, that's very concise. So the highlight is on the principle and also the materiality assessment. So that's from GRI. Also now I want to move on to Mrs. Tiangge to also answer the same question, maybe from your perspective, especially from the finance emission perspective.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for the question. That is also a great question. So essentially, let's put it this way. When we're using the Pcaf methodologies outlined in the standard for different asset classes, what you are calculating is a metric. You're looking at the metric and you will be able to come up with a absolute greenhouse gas emissions. And in this case, we refer to it as the finance emissions, because we're talking about the greenhouse gas emissions that you attribute from your the loans and investment in your portfolio, and how that helps with risk management or the general climate risk management and feeds into your the next steps such as taking climate actions is when we work out the emissions, you'll have an idea or a picture of your portfolio. You'll be able to see specifically where your carbon intensive hotspots are. So for instance, in particular industry and particular sector. And based on that, you will the idea is to let all of the financial institutions to have a better idea of the carbon intensiveness of their portfolio and start taking the relevant actions, such as the decarbonization of the portfolio, or such as taking climate actions and risk management steps. So that's the idea. I like to call this performing a health test on the portfolio and identify the risk and in your portfolio, really. And it's a it's typically an annual process where you monitor the progress towards your targets and your other climate actions and goals. Hope that answers your questions, and thank you for the question.
Yep. Thank you so much, Tiangge, for your answer. So unfortunately, because it's already time, we only have the time to only take one question for this session. So once again, I want to thank you to our speakers in this session. And now I would like to revert back to Bahasa. Jadi terima kasih banyak atas pertanyaan dari peserta. Saya lihat ini masih banyak pertanyaan yang masuk ke dalam Q&A box. Nanti kita juga akan lanjutkan kepada para pembicara untuk pertanyaan-pertanyaan yang belum dijawab. Sekarang karena kita waktunya cukup padat, sekarang kita akan masuk sejenak ke sesi coffee break ya. Kita ada waktu sekitar 3 menit untuk coffee break. Jadi kalau mau minum, kalau mau ke WC terlebih dahulu itu bisa kita pakai di waktu ini. Baik, sekarang kita akan coffee break dulu. Kita bisa ambil sekitar 3 menit untuk coffee break. Jadi nanti sekitar 2:58. Jadi sebelum jam 3 kita akan kembali untuk berkumpul untuk melanjutkan ke sesi kedua. Baik, silakan menikmati waktu coffee break dan kita juga akan menampilkan beberapa video untuk Anda di waktu coffee break ini. Terima kasih. Ya, selamat datang kembali kepada para peserta. Jadi mari kita mulai saja untuk sesi kedua di mana pembicara berikutnya akan membahas tentang dekarbonisasi dan juga peluang dalam keuangan yang berkelanjutan. Yang mana setelah itu akan dilanjutkan dengan sesi diskusi panel mengenai contoh kasus dari LJK terkait dengan Tcfd yang akan dimoderasi oleh Mrs. Pratima Divki. Baik, sekarang saya akan berikan saja kepada Mrs. Monica untuk mengawali sesinya. Monica, over to you, please.
Hello, a pleasure to be talking to you once again. And in this session, I am going to give a quick high-level overview of how assessing climate-related risk in line with TCFD can be transferred to opportunities in sustainable finance, and with a focus on case studies as well towards the end. So I do want to start off with something familiar to you again. I won't go into too much detail because Ali from GRI has given a very detailed overview in her presentation. But one of the things I do want to start with the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, TCFD, is because how understanding and going through TCFD assessments, you can translate that to opportunities. Now, on the left-hand side, you can see how broadly climate-related risk falls into two categories: the transition risk, which is risk resulting from a shift to a low-carbon economy, and then you have the physical risk, which is changes from temperature and weather as well. You can see on the right-hand side that TCFD not only looks at the risk factors, but also the opposite of risk, which is really the opportunities as well. So you can see from their various different energy sources, or even from, say, consumer demands, changes in consumer demand, and the drive for a more lower emission goods and services has direct impact on the revenue and the income of corporates as well. So TCFD really enables a company to consider risk and opportunities and the impact of that in their current and future financial position. And here, I still get quite a few questions on, like, sometimes a disconnect in the climate-related risk versus the financial risk that people are more used to, accustomed to. So this diagram really illustrates how the climate-related risk that you can see at the top, the physical risk as well as the transition risk that was mentioned in the previous slide, how that really translates into the more familiar financial risk at the bottom, so operational risk, market risk, credit risk, and liquidity risk as well. So you can go through various examples by yourself as well, but just as one example would be some of the policy changes that are coming out, and especially in Asia, where a lot of corporates are including internal carbon pricing as well. So whether it's from external taxes or internal from the corporates, how that really drives the operational cost of the companies, and in effect has a direct impact to the profitability as well. So whether that company is borrowing from banks, it translates into a credit risk. If the company is listed in the market, then obviously it will translate into market risk for investors. So just as an example, there are some estimations from example from Carbon Tracker that has come up and said in the next 10 years, there's going to be a technology risk which translates to about $2.2 trillion of stranded assets in oil and gas sector. Or some of the estimation comes out on the physical risk side of things, where they say that global, assets, the value of assets globally due to, physical risk when it comes to at around 2 degrees centigrade warming is estimated to be in between 2.7 or 4.2% of the asset pricing. And this came out from The Economist. So here, I've just given you a brief understanding of climate risk and how that translates and related to the financial risk. But I want to give an example of how it looks like in our disclosure. So I've taken out risk management out of the 4 pillars of TCFD. On the left-hand side, you can see the Tcfd recommendations, and the arrows kind of relate to how that translates into our questionnaire and what areas of the recommendations are considered in which of the questions. You can see on the top-hand side, on the right-hand side, are the general questions are requested to all corporates. On the lower side is questions related to financial services. And I took financial services questionnaire because a lot of the participants today are from the financial services sector. So this is kind of the questionnaire that you will be seeing when responding to CDP. And I want to take 2 analyses. So this is really how these data points or this disclosure can be analyzed and read from a reader's perspective, whether it's the investors or whether some of the regulators as well, how to interpret the disclosure that's aggregated as well. So one of the data points I want to pull out from the financial services sector questionnaire is the finance emissions, and this was very detailed, explained by Pcaf Tienga as well in her presentation. And we have reached out to roughly about 700 financial institutions globally. About half of them responded to our questionnaire. And out of the half that have responded, you can see in the table graph on the lower right-hand side that roughly about half of those responding, that's exactly 49%, have come up and said they actually don't do any analysis on the impact of climate risk relating to their portfolios. Whereas 25 of them have mentioned that they actually do calculate their financed emissions. And the figures that we have come from the disclosures of those 25% have come to about 700 times larger than their own operation emissions. So this is just the scope 3 investment emissions versus the scope 1, 2, and other non-investment scope 3 emissions, which is really a significant number. And this is one of the first times that really shows data to support what is more of a well-known fact that, for financial institutions, the climate impact is really in their financing. We have done some preliminary analysis for 2021 disclosures as well. So in there, we have seen an increased trend of finance emissions from those who are disclosing. So for an example, I would say there's a bank of last year who had calculated about 1,000 times of the finance emissions compared to their other operational emissions. This year, that figure has gone to almost 3,000 times. And it's largely because of their boundary coverage as well. They have increased their boundary to cover more assets in the portfolio, but also the improved quality of data and disclosures. So we see some of that coming up. The next analysis I want to give is on the risk and opportunities, because the case studies that we are going to be talking about is really focused on the opportunity side of sustainable finance. So here in our question, we can see that we ask several, we do ask the financial services sector to identify which climate-related risks they look into. So here you can see, the percentage of financial institutions looking into credit risk, market risk, and so forth. And on the lower side, it really shows the impact in terms of US dollar terms. So it's not only do you identify a certain risk, we do go a step further into asking what is that impact and what is that in terms of dollar terms and financial risk as well. On the right-hand side is really the impact of both risks identified and the opportunities as well. And you can see from this that a lot of financial institutions are really focusing on the opportunities in new services, products, going forward as well. So the next part is really translating the risk, the risks that have been identified, as I mentioned earlier slide, and how that really translates in practice in sustainable finance. Before I do go into that though, I do want to have a quick overview of where we are at the moment. So from COP26 from last month, you've seen a lot of net zero commitments come out and all the policies and pledges that have come out as well. So at the moment, this is post COP26. We are the world is roughly on track on the rise to 2.4 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. And this includes pre-COP26, it was actually at 2.7. We did an analysis within CDP of over 16,000 funds globally and found that less than 1% of the funds were really actually aligned to the Paris Agreement, and only about 0.5 were in line with 1.5, whereas a vast majority, about 2/3, were over 2.75 degrees. So it's roughly, you can see that the funds where the investments are right now is roughly in line with where the world is actually heading and where the policies and actions right now are here today. And I want to mention the fund. So Vivi earlier had mentioned about the financing gap and what's really needed to bump the gap that really is needed and the step that's really required from the private sector as well. And this slide is just an example and some findings from a report by IEA, International Energy Agency, earlier this year, of how much investments and finance need to be mobilized as well. So if you recall, there was a large announcement at COP26 from the GFANZ, which is Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. And the private sector came out committing $130 trillion to transforming the economy for net zero. In terms of ASEAN, there's some figures that came out and calculated that from the ASEAN region, roughly about $200 billion annually is needed until 2030 in terms of green bonds and loans. And also you can see some of the announcements recently by OJK of sustainable financing in Indonesia, how that has become around $55 billion in sustainable financing as of last November. You can really see a push for ESG and sustainable financing, a mainstreaming of it as well. If you just look into a global aspect of global assets under management as well, the global assets under management is already about 1/3 in ESG investments. The next that I want to show is just examples of what's been done, especially using CDP disclosures as well. So here is, I want to take a perspective from, a corporate financing perspective as well for those corporates who are joining us today. So from the examples would be split into two categories. One is financing from an equity financing perspective. The other will be a debt financing perspective. Here is from the equities. So this index is Stoxx Global Climate Change Leaders Index, and it really is an index that tracks CDP's A-listed companies. And you can see from this, chart benchmark compared to the broader index that the companies that are really taking a long-term sustainability planning and how that has effect in the market. So broadly speaking, the index has outperformed the broader index by roughly about 5% per annum for the past decade. Here's another example. This is also equities example as well. And this is a thematic fund, CPR, who is the thematic arm of Amundi Asset Management. And this fund really takes into account, it is a global fund, and accounts into CDP scores, companies that have scored A and B, and also companies that have set science-based targets on the Science-Based Targets Initiative as a starting point for the investment universe. So out of that group, they would do a bottom-up analysis to make a fund as well.
Excuse me, Monica, just
Yes.
a reminder, you have 1 more minute.
Yes, this is my last slide. Thank you, Esme. As my last slide, I just want to touch upon the debt financing side. So these are examples of sustainability-linked loans using CDP scores. So you can see in the first one, whereas it's a financing done using an overall CDP score. So this is a organizational level that is done on an annual basis from the disclosure. But on the bottom example, lower example, this sustainability linked loan was actually tied to one of the KPIs was tied to CDP supplier engagement rating. And this is some of the evolution, I would say, in sustainability linked financing that you can see is they're not just looking at the overall performance of an organization, but the trend is actually looking into the value chain as well and how they are and what kind of actions or engagement they are doing in their value chain. And with this, I would say I would just end here and now turn over to Pratima, who is our Regional Director at CDP for Hong Kong, Southeast Asia, Australia, and New Zealand. And she will talk to our panelists who will give real life examples of what they're doing as well. Over to you. Yeah.
Thank you, Monica. Sorry about that. I think you know, this has been a session that has brought together all of the viewpoints from an exchange perspective, a association and regulatory perspective, as well as some of the standard settings, such as the GRI, as well as the partnerships for carbon accounting financials. And then Monica just touched upon all of the practical based, you know, climate related financing that is happening globally. I want to take this conversation a step further and put the spotlight on what practitioners in our region are already doing in terms of climate assessments, climate impacts, and green finance. With me today, I have Hiram Kim, who is the Senior Manager, ESG Strategy Department for KB Financial Group from Korea. We have with us Nikorn Pan, who is Vice President, Corporate Sustainability at CM Commercial Bank. And not last but not least, we have Angeline Sumendap, who is Head of Corporate Communications at Barreto Pacific. So without much further ado, each of these practitioners have brought out the real life examples of what they are already integrating with respect to climate change within their corporate operations, as well as portfolio operations. So why don't we start off with Hiram Kim to give us a quick update on her KB Financial's strategy with respect to net zero. And I do want to congratulate KB for this, because they are the first bank in Asia Pacific that are actually developing a model that goes beyond climate resilience to focusing on decarbonization of their portfolio. Hiram?
Thank you, Pratima, for your congratulations.
Hiram, you may be on mute. We're not able to hear you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, now loud and clear.
Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hiram Kim, Senior Manager of ESG Strategy.
Hiram, unfortunately, we are having some issues with your sound. While the technicians work on that, should we move on to Nikorn Pan, who could provide perhaps the CM Commercial Bank's corporate and portfolio related sustainability journey?
Yep. Okay. Could you hear me now? Okay. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's a very good opportunity, and have to thank you, CDP, as well as other party, to invite us to participate in this session, which actually we consider ourselves to be the student in this game, because we just start our sustainability journey just a few years ago. Somebody like KB Kukmin is the bank that we admire, that they are just like the representation of the Asian bank to just compete with the other bank in the world index, put it this way. And I think that actually we are thinking that this session is very interesting, and we would like to share our our thought and our approach on the climate related things with my fellow Indonesian friend. Actually, I have been there only once, but I quite very impressive with Jakarta, I think. Actually, I think to get into the more okay, I think to discuss in more detail, we think that actually is a very the sustainability or the climate is something like a big agenda for the bank. Actually, for the SCB, we believe that it is for the climate related thing or the price of carbon. It could be something like a next capital that everyone have to consider when they are doing business, whether they are a bank or if there is a private company doing the business. So we are the last year. I think that during the COVID is a good time for us to reconsider ourselves, and it's the time that we launch our sustainability framework, because actually we have done the sustainability related strategy for quite some time, but it is something like a issue driven, more like it. But for the last year, we set up our sustainability framework, which is the shape of the pole tree, because actually our symbol of the bank is the leaf of the pole tree. and the tree is something like a look good in terms of the sustainability. But the key asset that I would like to stress is that we have to make alignment throughout the bank. And for us, the biggest letter in this framework is the most admired bank. That is our bank visions, and our sustainability strategy is clearly support the vision. And if we're going to zoom down into the more of the strategic pillar, that we have a 3 pillar. If you look at something like a center of the pictures, we have a sustainable finance, we have a creating social impact, and we have a better environmental futures. And that is our strategic pillar. And if you can look at the better environmental future, the climate risk and resilience is clearly set in there. And to go into more detail, the sustainable finance pillar also support the climate related risk in terms of the sustainable finance holistic product as well. And the key takeaway from this slide that I would like to share with everyone is the sustainability agenda for the bank or any institution, private companies, public company is something that have to be from the top. We are luckily that we reveal our visions and to set us to be the most admired bank. And to be the most admired bank, we cannot focus on only the back book value anymore, because actually my background is not the banker. My background is a scientist, but I have a chance to work for the bank, and I can see that there is a lot of crash in idea and understanding between these two practices. And I think this requires a lot of the will of the top and the commitment from the top to lead the bank to commit into something like they are not quite understand yet, but it is something that they have to do. You cannot wait to be perfect to do something. You have to start doing it, and then you will learn and being better with it. That is our will. And I think to get into more detail about this session, I think it's my next slide hopefully will illustrate how we address these climate related risk and opportunity within the Siam Commercial Bank, or we call SCB. I think it's the big one and the key important things is we have to set a goal. We set a goal that we have to be fully compliant with the TCFD by 2023, which actually is I think is next year, the year after next year. But actually, I think that we have to be compliant before that, because the climate related issue is something that you cannot wait anymore. And I think the result from the COP26 is clearly illustrate that there is the urgent need that we have to address somehow. And in SDB, I would like to share that we separate the key element in climate strategy into three elements. The first one is about the project appraisals, which is a bit quite obviously for a banker, I think. The second one is the climate finance. And the last one is about the portfolio review. But what I would like to stress, the importance of these three elements is it has to have a relationship between each other. You cannot just stand alone and not, if you set up a project team to work on each element, you cannot stand alone and just working on your task. You have to communicate. You have to have a relationship between each element to make it dynamic and to communicate about to other elements, because actually it's a connected one, but I just separate it to make it easier to understand with this way. And may I start with the first one that is a quite obvious one, the project appraisal. The last year, actually not last year, this year actually, we set up a new underwriting criteria that for the large scale project that is going to ask us for the form of the project finance or project related corporate loan, we require our client that they have to do the alternative analysis as well as the transition risk assessment for the project that is deemed going to have more than 100,000 tons of CO2 equivalents. Because we understand that for the large scale project that is come in the form of the project finance or the project related corporate finance, they're going to have they're going to stay in our portfolio for quite some time. And it's very obvious that they have to consider that they can handle the transition risk as very well as they have to do substantial or not, or put it this way, appropriate alternative analysis that this project is really need to address the need of the society, whether it's for example, like if you're going to build a power plant project, definitely the renewable energy is something like the most preferred one. But if you're going to build something like a natural gas fired power plant, you need to have a good rationale that why the natural gas power plant is needed. But I leave the coal fire off this context for the sake of time, put it this way. But another way that we would like to put it as well is about the physical risk assessment, because of we understand that for the big project, it could have a big consequence and going to generate a big issue for the return. But actually, I think the time is running. Then the project appraisal is something like we have to do it anyway, but we incorporate the climate aspect into it. But the area that we put a lot of focus in there is about the climate finance, because actually it is the area that we would think that we as a banker as well as other financial institutes can help this world is to mobilize the capital to support the green project, the project that is going to help the world is a better place. That's why we set up the sustainable finance target for all segment, whether it's a wholesale banking, small and medium enterprise banking, retail banking, or even the wealth management. We set them the target that how much that they have gonna have in their portfolio, and this is the target for the chief wholesale or chief SME banking. And that is the way that we're going to stimulate that they're going to have a more green or sustainable finance in their portfolio. And I think just recently, what we're quite proud about it is that we are the first bank in Thailand that we issue sustainability linked derivative in Thailand, which is a very emerging market that not a lot of people doing sustainability link with the derivative products. But we believe this is the future, and this is what we can help our client to be a better company by our financial products. And the last one is about the portfolio review that we acquire our external consultant to help us with the climate scenario analysis and to project the ESG risks, including the climate risk in our portfolio, to fully understand that what it's going to look like. But we understand that it is not a checkbox exercise. This is what I would like to stress, that the climate issue is real, and you cannot just complete it and just check your checkbox and going to do something else. You need to integrate it into the existing structure of the risk management office, that this is one of the risks that you have to take care of, and to make sure that it is sustained in your organization. Okay, I think that I'll just leave it for here. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikorn. Fascinating to hear that CM Commercial Bank has hired a climate scientist to run their climate strategy, clearly wanting to link the business with the issues of climate finance. I wanted to also specifically congratulate you on the sustainability-linked derivative product, because that was something I recall when the last time we spoke, this was something you were working on. So it's really great to hear that has gone through, and the kind of financing opportunities you're already seeing in sustainability. I think if we were to sort of take the conversation back one step, what is the advice that you would really have for banks in Indonesia who are approaching their own climate strategies? This is a vast topic. You can approach it from all kinds of different angles. Where would you recommend they start, given the challenges that everyone faces with respect to developing climate strategies?
Sorry, I think it's a good question to ask, because actually I don't have time to touch it in my presentation. I think that the area that you should focus, and I think is the big trend that is going to coming next, is about the consequence from the last COP26. I think that Thailand maybe is just a bit follower, but the way the government commits to the net zero target, it means that there's going to be a big shift in the way the economy is developed. And definitely, I think that our clients in the real sectors have an issues. I think that for Indonesia, I think you have a big base of the auto manufacturing supply as well as Thailand, and there is a big target from whether you are supplying the part for the Japanese firm or the Western firm, that they're going to do the net zero, and the country is going to do a net zero. There need to be a lot of improvement for the real sector. And I think the big question is how we are in the financial sector can help that transition go smoothly, as well as I think another area is to talk to the regulator, and other is something like asset owner, to understand this is the key priorities and how are we going to go together to help everybody meet the net zero goal. That's it.
Thank you, Nikorn. Thank you so much for joining us again today. Moving on to Hiram, Hiram, would be great for you to have the quick presentation that you prepared for us on actually taking the step forward from climate resilience to decarbonization. Over to you.
Thank you, Pratima, for your kind words. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Haring Kim from KB Financial Group. Thank you for your invitation. And let me first thank CDP and IDX for inviting KB and arranging this wonderful workshop. So subject of my presentation is KB's journey toward net zero. I will focus on KB's strategies and endeavors to promote sustainable finance and combat climate change. Next slide, please. I'll start off by giving you a brief overview of KB Financial Group. We are Korea's leading financial group with the largest customer base, the most extensive sales network, and the biggest market cap. We're committed to delivering one-stop financial services through our 13 subsidiaries, ranging from banking, securities, asset management, life and non-life insurance, credit cards, etc., catering to needs of broad range of customers, both retail and wholesale. Next slide, please. This slide shows our ESG milestones for the last few years. Once you enter the ESG ecosystem, you will notice that it is all about understanding and navigating through ESG alphabet soup, such as CDP, TCFD, SBTI, Pcaf, etc. It is indeed overwhelming, but that was our first step in starting our ESG journey. Before we set up ESG governance structure and develop strategies and concrete action plans, we dived into and explored the alphabet soup to learn how the world around us is evolving and how climate change will affect our businesses, our lives, and our planet. Actively joining and engaging with climate-related initiatives and alliances enabled us to see far beyond the Korean market and to be equipped with the global perspectives. We developed deep knowledge, awareness, and insights on ESG agenda, including climate change, by struggling to digest this complex nature of ESG alphabet soup. Armed with extensive knowledge and capacity, we were able to tell our board and management about what we need to focus on to drive ESG leadership in this financial services market. I believe our ESG journey had a good head start and moving toward the right direction, thanks to our thorough and intensive preparation and efforts to understand the alphabet soup. Next slide, please. KB Financial Group has been a supporter of TCFD since 2018. Governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. These 4 pillars are essential part of TCFD, as Monica explained before. It looks so simple, but when we try to report in accordance with these 4 elements, we end up finding that it is not so easy to fill in each box with relevant and concrete words. The TCFD recommendation is a very useful framework in the sense that it calls on companies to fill in those boxes with concrete actions and plans to address climate risks and opportunities. You need to have all the right elements in place, and it requires taking a step-by-step approach to build strong climate resilience and capacity. We have done a lot of work to comply with the TCFD recommendations, and the results are disclosed in our sustainability report every year. This year, we are planning to release a separate TCFD report early December. Next slide, please. If understanding alphabet soup is a prep course for our ESG journey, setting up a robust ESG governance structure is a cornerstone of long-lasting sustainability. Strong governance is a prerequisite for and a key driver of ensuring sustainable and successful implementation of ESG and climate strategies. Unlike other business agenda, top-down approach is needed for ESG to be effective and to be embedded across the organization, rather than bottom-up approach. KB is the first financial group in Korea to establish board-level ESG committee, which is composed of all board members. And as a member of the committee, our CEO, Mr. Yoon, fully recognizes the importance of ESG and climate agenda. As the board and the CEO take full responsibilities for and oversight over ESG matters, we were able to take many bold moves. For example, in March 2020, last year, we set our mid to long-term ESG strategy. In September last year, we made anti-coal financing pledge for the first time among Korean financial institutions. This year, we also announced our net zero strategy with clear targets. Also, our ESRM, environmental and social risk management policy, was approved by our board recently. Not only at group level, but also at subsidiary level, we have ESG committee, management committees, and organizations in charge. This enables us ESG agenda to be incorporated into our businesses and successfully implemented. Next slide, please. Strategy is another important factor. KB's mission is delivering changes through our financial services for happier life and better world. Our ESG goals and targets will be driving force behind fulfilling our mission. Our ESG strategy is well expressed in two slogans. First, Net Zero Star and Green Wave 2030. Also, we have focus areas for each ESG factor. Next slide, please. Having clear target is very crucial. Net Zero Star is our carbon neutrality strategy. We set our net zero target by 2040 and 2050. For scope 1 and 2 emissions, we will reach net zero by 2040 after realizing 42 reduction by 2030. And for scope 3, financed emissions, which is crucial part of financial institutions, we plan to reach net zero by 2050. Under Net Zero Star, we focus on supporting environmentally friendly businesses, accelerating transformation towards a low carbon economy, aligning our strategy with the Paris Agreement, and restoring the environment. And Green Wave 2030 is aimed at achieving 50 trillion won in ESG products, investment, and loans by 2030. Next slide, please. We have built our ESG capacity within the group, established strong governance structure, and developed strategy and set targets. Our efforts eventually bear fruit. In October this year, as mentioned by Pratima, we became one of the first financial institutions in the world to get seal of approval by Science-Based Targets Initiative for our net zero targets. It took us more than half a year to measure carbon emissions using Pcaf methodology to set targets and get approval from SBTi. It was a long and grueling journey, but we are able to carry on with full and firm support from the board and the management. We envisioned charting a new course for net zero journey in the financial institutions. Of course, our net zero journey has just started and we still have a long way to go, but I'm confident that we can address challenges by learning, supporting, and collaborating together. Next slide, please. And finally, I'd like to highlight some key points that we need to focus on as we are moving forward. We now know that the market sentiment has fundamentally shifted and there's a sense of urgency, and ESG and climate are high on everyone's agenda. But as many global leaders and financial market participants point out, that making commitments and pledges is not enough. We need to really act on it by aligning our strategies with concrete steps. I'd like to say two things are needed to drive ESG and sustainability progress: capital and disclosure. First, capital. We need to scale up in the ESG investing and shift capital flows to climate solutions and businesses with positive impacts to tackle climate change and save our planet. That's why financial sector's role is increasingly important. Our role is pivotal in making a better world. And second, facilitating disclosures across the market will ensure better decision-making for investors and other stakeholders. Credible, consistent, and transparent disclosure are required to shift capital flows into the right direction and ensure just transition toward a low-carbon economy. We at KB Financial Group will also do our part in both local and global market to drive ESG and sustainability. That's all for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hiram. I think when I was looking at a couple of the slides that you showed earlier, the net zero target seems to be sort of thought of not just from an emissions reduction perspective. So you've set the operational emissions, which is your own business, and the targets for those are different from the portfolio level emissions, which are a separate challenge really to take on. But the third area that then you've brought into place is as you shift towards net zero transformation for financing activities, you are also then identifying in number terms, the actual opportunity that you will see within the portfolio that will come from ESG financing activities. I think one of the questions that I really had was, what was the trigger within KB Financial Group to really lead on such a bold action? I mean, you're the first in Asia, and there will be followers and you're the leader. So what really pulled the trigger from your organization?
We're very proud to get the first approval in the among the Asian financial institution from the SPTI's approval. And the biggest trigger, I think, is that we got the full and very active support from our management and the board. Because we, as I mentioned earlier, we set up the board level ESG committee in March last year. It was composed of all the directors in the board, and it is the highest decision-making body in our company for ESG matters. And our board and the management had a lot of concerns and discussions about our roles and responsibilities, living up to our positions and as a leader of the local financial market. And because we all understand and recognize that moving toward a low carbon economy and the contributing to the net zero economy is very essential, then we need to take the leading role to contribute contribute that. So the board made a firm and very bold decision to make a pledge to stop the financing for coal for the first time in the Korean financial institution. And also we were able to make the net zero target. And this was led to the approval by the SPTI for the first time among the Asian financial institution.
Thank you, Hiram. I think this very much resonates with what Nick Horn also said earlier, which is, the top down that is needed and the board involvement that is needed to address this topic. And thank you so much for joining us today. I think moving to Angeline Sumendap, who is the head of corporate communications from Barito Pacific. And this is where I think we would really get to hear from on the ground a company that is leading on its corporate efforts for sustainability in Indonesia. Angeline, over to you.
Thank you, Pratima. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor for me to be here to speak and share information and convey ideas on what Barito Pacific has done as a group. Let me share the presentation. Yeah. So Barito Pacific, we have more than 40 years of experience building Indonesia's petrochemical and energy sector. Barito Pacific is an integrated energy company based in Indonesia with multiple power and industrial assets. Through Star Energy, our geothermal wing, we operate a combined asset capacity of 875 megawatt geothermal clean energy electricity. Along with Indonesia Power, a wholly owned subsidiary of PLN, Barito is developing Java 9 and 10, ultra supercritical power plant with enhanced efficiencies and environmental performance. Barito Pacific Group has also controlling shares and consolidates Chandra Asri Petrochemical, also publicly listed, the largest and only integrated petrochemical company in Indonesia. We also have our non-profit foundation called Yayasan Bakti Barito or Bakti Barito Foundations, who helps us roll out our social, economic, and environmental programs together with our other business units. Our ESG footprint, I would like just to share some numbers that we also share actively with our investors. So Barito Group has rolled out around $950 million in capital expenditure direct and generated funding more than 2 billion for green projects. And this is between 2018 to 2020. Barito Pacific Group's allocation for capital expenditure for green projects amounts to around 50% of our portfolio. And the green assets contributes to Barito Group EBITDA around 60%. Again, this is 2018 and 2020 data. Barito Group has rolled out also up to 300 billion rupiah in CSR project in the last 8 to 9 years, and is now one of MSCI ESG leaders. So we have the rate BB and consolidate sustainability reporting annually from our business units, Chandra Asri and Star Energy. Our motto, of course, our leadership motto is, of course, we need to appreciate all green efforts. So don't shoot down anyone who wants to do green, right? And then sustainability must also be viable financially. If not, it will not come true. We must also understand that times change, so we need to lead by example and dare to take actions. Although sometimes this action may be disputable, but in order to move forward and provide green energy to Indonesia, you just have to do it, right? Okay, let me share a little bit from Chandra Asri's site. This is also publicly listed, and these are various information that are available online in Chandra Asri's website. So Chandra Asri, the petrochemical arm, managed to reduce emission intensity by 8.45% compared to previous years in 2020. Chandra Asri, in regards to green financing, partners with Hana Bank for 13 million US dollars of sustainability-linked loan to refinance its enclosed ground flare project and electric forklift armada. So these are all projects that will reduce emission or reduce energy intensity. And we also have the metrics of how much carbon dioxide Chandra Asri will eliminate. Chandra Asri also has completed its solar panel, working together with Total Energies, will cut emission up to 1,700 tons CO2 equivalent, hopefully yearly. And Chandra Asri also is the pioneer of plastic asphalt road circular economy in Indonesia, working together with provincial government and business associations such as Inaplas and Adupi, and supports various waste management and recycling projects such as Waste Bank in Cilegon City and Jakarta Recycling Center. For Star Energy, our ESG footprint, Star Energy has issued a green bond up to 1.11 billion in two phases. The first one is in 2018 and the second one in 2020. The green document is available. If you want to take a look further, the green documents are available in Star Energy website. Also the third party independent evaluation. We believe that this issuance of green bond marks a significant milestone in the shift towards a more friendly, sustainable energy sector in Indonesia. Also, I would like to add, in its operations, Star Energy Geothermal does not emit carbon emission. On the contrary, as a renewable energy company, it has produced 5,000 gigawatt of electricity from renewable resource that can light 2.7 million homes. Star Energy also has certification or carbon credit. The first one is SARE, certified emission reduction, with total production of 1.4 million tons a year, and REC, renewable energy certificate, with total production of 3 million tons megawatt hour per year. So if any of the businesses here would like to seek carbon trade or carbon credit, feel free to contact Star Energy. I think that's it from me. Pratima, over to you. Thank you.
Angeline, thank you so much. This is fascinating to always hear, because I think to me the key point was, when you pointed out the CapEx, towards green projects, which is already sort of 50% of your overall CapEx, but at the same time, it's already contributing to about 60% of your EBITDA. So already in sort of financial terms, you're working towards seeing what the opportunity in sustainability is. We do have one question from the audience, and I thought that might be actually interesting to pose in a slightly different manner as well, which really sort of came to accountability and reporting, especially with respect to all of the green bonds or green financing that you do. How do you sort of, do you use any of the external auditors in reporting this? And how does the monitoring happen with respect to these financing instruments?
Specifically, I think, let me just provide an example with green bond, right? So there are a few steps that the corporate finance team should do before they issue the green bond. I will be able to provide more details to you, but basically, For example, we need, before we issue the green bond, we need to have a third-party independent assessment that is available, that should be published online. So Star Energy worked together with the Carbon Trust to provide this assessment before the issuance is sort of rolled out to the market. And this assessment, of course, for transparency, should also be accessible. And within this assessment, it spells out all the different monitoring phases and what is needed to be followed.
Thank you so much, Angeline. And sort of one follow-up question from there was, with respect to supply chains, because, large corporations obviously have a lot of supply chains, which are smaller companies, which also need to be brought along on this green journey at some point. So how are you engaging with your supply chains on this matter?
Yeah. So I think that's a really good question in terms of sustainability for our supply chain, because we are in both in petrochemical and in energy sector. Each of our business units in our group has a comprehensive procedure to ensure accountable supply chain and procurement process based on quality, competence, and credibility. All of the business units implement a strict process safety management to ensure employees and contractor safety. So this is at our plant in each location, right? In petrochemical, Chandra Asri follows strict rules and regulations in chemical safety aligned with EU REACH standards and Responsible Care International principles. They also conduct life cycle assessment to identify the carbon footprint of each product and sort of try to minimize and mitigate its impact to the environment. In geothermal, we implement an integrated geothermal operation management system, including environmental protection programs to minimize impact to climate change, opting for environmentally friendly materials, conservation of biodiversity, and fostering transparent communications with our surrounding communities. So in essence, I think what I would like to say is we understand that sustainability and ESG should encompass all aspects of our operation, and it is important to ensure we get every detail right.
Thank you. I'd like to, apologies, we're running out of time. So, this has been a fascinating panel, great insights from all of the three practitioners. So I'd like to, personally thank you for joining us today and taking your time for this panel. Let me just pass this back on to Wisnu for the rest of the session. Thank you again.
Yep. Thank you, Pratima. So, terima kasih banyak kepada Pratima serta panelis yang telah berkenan untuk sharing mengenai aksi dan juga tindakan dari perusahaan mereka yang terkait dengan perjalanan perusahaan mereka untuk mendorong keuangan berkelanjutan. Selanjutnya, untuk menutup rangkaian kegiatan workshop ini, kami ingin memperkenalkan Bapak Ridwan Kurniawan, yang merupakan bagian dari Sustainable Development Team dari Kedutaan Besar Inggris di Jakarta. Sebelumnya, rangkaian kegiatan workshop dan kegiatan yang sudah diselenggarakan selama tahun 2021 ini dapat terlaksana atas pembiayaan dan juga dukungan dari pemerintah Inggris dan juga rekan-rekan dari Kedutaan Besar Inggris di Jakarta. Kami sangat mengapresiasi dukungannya, dan dengan ini saya ingin mengundang Bapak Ridwan untuk memberikan kata penutupan. Baik, kepada Bapak Ridwan Kurniawan, waktu dan tempat saya persilahkan.
Selamat sore, Bapak dan Ibu. Terima kasih Pak Wisnu atas waktu dan kesempatan yang diberikan dan perkenalan yang cukup cepat. Dan karena memang ini sudah di tahap akhir, semoga masih sempat untuk bisa mendengarkan sedikit saja dari kesimpulan yang saya lihat dari kegiatan kita hari ini. Gitu. Pertama-tama, seperti yang sudah disampaikan, memang pemerintah Inggris adalah yang mensponsori kegiatan dari serangkaian training dan webinar yang dilakukan oleh GRI bersama dengan CDP, didukung oleh Bappenas, Indonesia Stock Exchange, dan ICSA. memang sedihnya kegiatan kita untuk yang serangkaian training capital market webinar ini adalah mungkin yang terakhir untuk tahun 2021 dan ini adalah workshop penutup dan sebelum kita benar-benar ditutup, saya ingin menyampaikan ucapan terima kasih yang sebesar-besarnya kepada tentu saja Indonesia Stock Exchange yang selalu mendukung dari serangkaian kegiatan ini dari awal sampai akhir, ICSE dan tentu saja Bappenas yang memang di mana kegiatan ini tidak akan terlaksana kecuali dukungan dari ketiga institusi, dukungan yang sangat kuat dari ketiga institusi tersebut. Nah, terakhir juga kami dari British Embassy Jakarta juga ingin menyampaikan gratitude dan terima kasih yang sangat banyak atas pekerjaan yang sangat profisiat yang baik dari tim CDP dan JRI dalam melakukan serangkaian kegiatan pelatihan green financing untuk dan transparansi ya dan standards untuk Indonesia. Mungkin dari saya ingin menyampaikan beberapa hal. Pertama adalah pemerintah Inggris mewakili Pak Duta Besar, mohon maaf beliau tidak bisa hadir untuk menyampaikan regards-nya kepada semua teman-teman di sini. Tapi saya dimandatkan untuk menyampaikan bahwa pemerintah Inggris pasca COP26 kemarin gitu ya sangat serius ingin mendukung semua sustainable project di seluruh dunia dan spesifik karena memang di Indonesia maka kami juga ingin memobilize financing untuk di Indonesia gitu. Kami memahami bahwa membiayai project SDG seperti yang sudah dijelaskan ya tadi begitu kompleksnya dari praktisi-praktisi dan ternyata masih bisa juga dilakukan baik apa namanya di private sector gitu ya. Itu adalah isu yang sangat kompleks, apalagi sekarang kita juga menghadapi pandemi, masih belum akhir, semoga berakhir dengan cepat. Jadi pemerintah Indonesia dan pemerintah Inggris berusaha menjawab kompleksitas isu ini post COP26 dengan secara serius ingin memobilisasi financing dan resource untuk bisa membiayai proyek SDG tersebut. Kita juga sudah mengetahui tadi dari session pertama bahwa Bappenas sendiri sudah menyiapkan serangkaian orkestrasi untuk bisa menjembatani berbagai macam jenis financing karena memang kompleksitas dari proyek ini sendiri dan dibutuhkan berbagai macam jenis financing dan bentuk yang supaya bisa channeling terhadap proyek-proyek tersebut. Kami sangat mendukung hal ini dan dari sini kita semua juga sudah jelas bahwa dengan berbagai macam jenis financing dan bentuk model project yang juga berbeda-beda menghadapi tantangan yang sangat kompleks ini dibutuhkan sebuah standar yang jelas sehingga bisa memiliki bahasa yang universal gitu ya, tentang bagaimana lalu SDG itu seperti apa dan hal-hal minimum apa yang harus kita sampaikan sehingga kita bisa mengakses financing tersebut. Nah, standar-standar itu sudah disampaikan tadi juga di sesi pertama dan bahwa itu sangat doable dan bisa dicapai bahkan sudah dilakukan oleh beberapa champion perusahaan-perusahaan besar di Indonesia. Di sisi lain, tentu saja standar hanyalah akan standar dan dia tidak akan bisa kita achieve dan kita bisa targetkan atau kita tunjukkan ketika tidak ada transparansi. Di sini CDP sudah menjelaskan juga jelas bahwa dengan adanya bahasa yang sama dengan standar tersebut, dengan adanya hanya akan bisa muncul ketika kita secara transparan melaporkan apa saja yang sudah dilakukan sehingga itu bisa menjadi untuk bisa mencapai standar yang ada. Nah, dari ini semua kami ingin menyampaikan bahwa di Inggris kami ingin menyampaikan transparansi ini adalah hal yang sangat penting. Kementerian Keuangan Inggris sudah mewajibkan untuk semua perusahaan yang terdaftar di Inggris untuk mempublikasikan rencana transisi mereka di tahun 2023 dan ini harus secara transparan. Semua perusahaan Inggris yang terdaftar dan merupakan English taxpayer harus menjelaskan transisi mereka di 2023 terhadap sustainable target itu apa dan harus dipublikasikan. London Stock Exchange juga sudah menyampaikan dengan diskusi setelah diskusi kuat dengan pemerintah bahwa mereka ingin secara jelas ingin membuka beberapa carbon market yang sudah volunteer, sudah melakukan skema carbon trading dan carbon market untuk terlihat lebih luas sehingga nudging untuk beberapa player lain supaya mau mengikuti jejak-jejak volunteer tersebut. Nah, dari ini semua kami ingin menyampaikan bahwa tidak hanya kami ingin berpartner dengan Indonesia, kami di pemerintah Inggris juga serius gitu pasca COP bahwa mengikuti standar dan menjadi transparan untuk mengakses green financing itu adalah salah satu kunci langkah awal pertama sehingga kita bisa mencapai target SDGs dan bisa membuat proyek-proyek yang sebelumnya hanya di kertas menjadi real dan terbiayai dan menjadi proyek yang benar-benar terlaksana. Dari situ saya ingin berikan closing statement. Tentu saja kami sudah melihat bahwa di Indonesian Stock Exchange juga sudah memulai gitu ya, dan kami sangat mengapresiasi ketika Indonesian Stock Exchange sudah sign up untuk mendukung Tcfd, sudah menjadi salah satu supporternya, ini salah satu hal yang bisa kita banggakan, dan kami berharap Indonesian Stock Exchange juga bisa menjadi salah satu yang terdepan di regionalnya di ASEAN, bersama negara-negara yang lain, mungkin sudah mulai bisa bersaing dengan Singapura dan Thailand untuk bisa semakin mendukung transparansi dan standar terutama untuk pembiayaan green financing dan proyek-proyek SDG. Dan tentu saja kami menunggu apa saja yang akan dilakukan breakthrough yang dilakukan oleh Indonesia, mulai dari Indonesian Stock Exchange, Bappenas, dan tentu saja private sector apa saja yang akan dilakukan untuk merealisasikan target SDG dan mencapai climate targets NDC Indonesia ataupun dunia yang harus kita lakukan bersama. Demikian dari saya, terima kasih atas waktu dan kesempatan yang diberikan. Mohon maaf jika terlalu panjang. Tapi akhir kata kami ucapkan terima kasih dan saya mewakili Pak Duta Besar ingin mengucapkan beribu-ribu terima kasih dan semoga dukungan kami yang mungkin bisa dibilang masih hanya sedikit dari semua kebutuhan yang ada masih bisa membantu dan bisa menjadikan semangat lebih lagi untuk teman-teman di private sector ataupun di sektor yang lain untuk mencoba mencapai standar dan mencoba lebih transparan sehingga bisa mengakses green financing yang ada di seluruh dunia, spesifiknya dari pemerintah atau dari UK. Demikian Mas Wisnu, terima kasih atas waktu dan kesempatannya. Saya tutup. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih banyak atas closing statement-nya Pak Ridwan. Jadi itu merupakan akhir dari rangkaian workshop kami. Sekali lagi terima kasih banyak kepada pembicara dan juga peserta yang sudah berpartisipasi pada workshop hari ini. Sebelum Anda meninggalkan ruangan ini, kami akan sangat mengapresiasi apabila Anda dapat meluangkan waktu Anda sekitar 5 menit saja untuk mengisi survei umpan balik khususnya untuk sesi hari ini. Jadi silakan untuk menggunakan link yang ada di chat box yang sudah di-post oleh rekan saya, atau Anda juga dapat mengakses melalui QR code yang terdapat pada slide ini. Sekali lagi, masukan dari Anda itu akan sangat berharga bagi kami, dan kami akan sangat mengapresiasi segala masukan yang Anda berikan melalui survei ini. Pada form surveinya, saya sekedar ingin mengingatkan, silakan untuk memilih multi-country, dan juga CDP Worldwide sebagai pelaksananya, dan juga silakan pilih Advanced Workshop sebagai nama dari pelatihan hari ini. Baik, saya akan tunggu sejenak supaya peserta dapat mulai mengakses QR code ini atau menggunakan link yang ada di chat box agar dapat mengisi survei. For panelists, I just want to inform you that if you are still here, please hold on for another 1 or 2 minutes. After I close the event, we would like to have a quick photo session together. Baik, saya rasa waktunya sudah cukup tadi untuk mengakses link-nya maupun menggunakan QR code-nya. Jadi sekian saja dari kami untuk sesi webinar di hari ini. Sekali lagi terima kasih untuk pembicara dan peserta yang sudah ikut serta pada sesi hari ini dan juga workshop-workshop sebelumnya. Mohon maaf apabila terdapat kekurangan atau kesalahan selama berlangsungnya rangkaian workshop ini. Saya berharap bahwa rangkaian workshop yang sudah kami siapkan dan sudah kami berikan untuk Anda itu dapat terus bermanfaat bagi Anda maupun bagi perusahaan Anda ke depannya. Baiklah, saya tutup saja acaranya. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat sore, salam sejahtera, sehat selalu, dan sampai jumpa di lain kesempatan. Untuk para panelis, mari kita foto bersama terlebih dahulu. Terima kasih. Mbak Koli, mungkin boleh di sessionnya apakah boleh di end? And for panelists, we would like just to have a quick photo up together. So Mbak Koli will be the one that is taking the photo, and I will be just counting down. I just want to check, Mbak Koli, is all our speakers' video is on? Because I cannot check them one by one. Yes, I think it's on, all of them. So let's look at the camera and give your best smile. And I'll going to count until 3. And Mbak Koli, please take the picture. So 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, Mbak Koli, I think we already take our picture. So once again, for the panelists and for the also for moderators, thank you so much for coming on time and for sharing in this event. Apologies if there's just now some technical issues, but once again, thank you for your participation, and have a nice day and have a nice rest of the week, and please stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you everyone.
Terima kasih Mbak Koli sudah
Terima kasih Bapak Ibu.
Terima kasih Mbak Kinanti. Thank you Maria.
Thank you
Terima
Harim.
kasih,
Thank you
Pak
Maria.
Thank you, Miss Harim. Thank you,
Thank you,
Maria.
Miss Harim. Apologies for the technical issues just now.
Thank you all.
Okay.
It was great.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm gonna leave the room sekali lagi.
Yes.
Thank you Mbak Koli. Thank you Kinanti. Terima kasih banyak untuk tim dari IDX. Have a nice day.
Ya, terima kasih Pak Wisnu.
Yo, sama-sama.
Maria, Miss Herim, thank you.